having a dialogue, if that sounds good.
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, for those of you who don't know me, as I mentioned before, my name is Mingus. I'm one of your commissioners on council. I am the commissioner in charge of the Water Bureau, the Bureau of Environmental Services, and PBOT. So I am essentially your infrastructure guy. I think I've been in this role for about 2.5 years, if I recall correctly. Probably more important than that, I'm also a dad. I have 2 boys, one age 14 and one age 13. They just started high school and entered the last year of middle school this week, last week. It's kind of a blur at this point. I'm amazed I can get them to school on time and home. That's still a challenge at this point this week. And in addition to that, prior to joining council, I have also been a teacher. I'm a political scientist by training. I got my PhD in government from Cornell, and have spent my career basically bouncing between academics and public service. So some of you who have been involved in the neighborhood association system for a while might remember that I used to be the guy in charge of the city's neighborhood association system. I also used to help run the city's crime prevention program. And probably another significant thing to know about me is that I am also a candidate to be mayor of the city of Portland. And I'll tell you, when people learn that about me, the question I get most often is, why do you want to be mayor? And I'll tell you, and I can tell by the reactions in that room, that question can mean one of 2 things. One is, Mingus, why would you subject yourself to the trials and tribulations of both running for mayor of Portland and then actually facing the day-to-day, if not hour-to-hour, and frankly minute-to-minute challenges that come with being mayor of this fair city? And then the second version of that question is, Mingus, what do you want to accomplish once you actually are mayor? And let me just take a minute to address both. First, the slightly disbelieving version of that question. Why would someone like me want to be mayor of Portland? Well, the reason for that, I suspect, is the same reason that you're here in this room today. I love Portland. Portland made me the man I am today. And the city that we all love, we all know, is in trouble. Homelessness is out of control. Crime is out of control. We see residents and businesses fleeing this city for only the second time in 100 years because the psychic and financial costs of living in Portland are just too damn high. But I believe that we can turn this around. I think that's one of the lessons of my 20 years of doing political work and public policy work. I truly believe that Portland is one of the greatest cities in North America. That's part of our legacy, that's part of our brand, and I believe that we can make Portland a great city again. And I also believe that in terms of the work, I work shoulder to shoulder with the mayor literally every day. And it is really challenging. The amount of stuff that comes your way is unrelenting. At the same time, I very much believe in doing the most important work that I can find. And I'll tell you, at this moment in history, I can imagine no work more important than actually helping lead the city to a better future. Now, the second question, or version of that question is, essentially, Mingus, what do you want to accomplish when you are mayor of Portland? And at a very high level, my goal, my North Star, is to make Portland the best run city in America. And when I share that with people, I know sometimes eyes will roll. But I also point out that it was only a few short years ago that Portland was really the envy of the world. We had Back when I ran the neighborhood association system, we literally had delegations come in from all over the planet to figure out how Portland managed to stand up such an amazing system that you all are participating in, and I think it's helped make Portland the great city that it is. Of course, Portland has been on the forefront of making this community green and equitable and dynamic and culturally vibrant and economically prosperous, and I believe that we can do that again. But in order to make Portland the best run city in America, I also believe that we have to have the courage to change. You know, I think that we have to have the courage to look at some of our well-intentioned policies that frankly haven't worked, and have the courage and bravery to actually say, we need to try something different. And I think that if we are willing to try something different, we can lead Portland to a new and better place. Now, courage, you know, is relevant to every minute of every day of whoever is going to be mayor of Portland, but I believe there are 3 areas in particular where we have to have some courage to do some things different. Those areas include houselessness, public safety, and economic recovery. And on the houselessness front, I think we have all seen over the past several years, both the city of Portland spent hundreds of millions of dollars trying to house our most vulnerable neighbors, and frankly, the results that we have gotten have not been good. In my analysis, part of the challenge here is that both the city and the county have a responsibility for managing our houseless problem. The city is essentially responsible for keeping our city clean and safe, and the county is responsible for the human services side of this equation. And in order to make this joint partnership work, the city gives the county about $40 million a year to help house the houseless. And if you have read the newspapers over the past several years, you will have noticed that the county has really struggled to, frankly, even just get those dollars out the door. So one of the things that I think that we have to have the courage to do is to recognize that the relationship between the city and the county, specifically in the context of the joint office, is broken, and we need to do something different in this space. Which is why I'll be calling for a fundamental re-examination and reinvention of how the city and the county work together to house Portlanders. You know, I think that the city and the county definitely need to work together in order to get that important work done. However, the systems that we've used so far have clearly failed. The second space where I think we really need to have courage to make some change has to deal with public safety. I tell you, if we go back and look at the average number of homicides that we had in Portland, you know, even as recently as like 7 years ago, it was about 25. You know, today, we're averaging about 100 homicides a year. That is horrific. As a guy who has 2 young kids who take public transportation home from school at the end of every day, it scares me to death. I think we have all at some points heard bullets fired. We all know someone who has had their car or a home broken into. We all know someone who has had a truly terrifying experience on our streets, and we need to address the fact that if we're going to prosper again as a city, we have to do better in this space. And one of the ways we could do better is to recognize the hard fact that Portland is remarkably under-policed. If you take a look at the number of cops that we have in this town and the number that you would actually expect Portland to have, the difference is stark. Today we have about 802 police officers serving the city. For a city our size, I think that we need to have about 1,200. That would be kind of the typical ratio that you'd expect, but we're far off from that. It's not easy in this town to make that argument, but I believe that it's true. And if you elect me mayor, I will work to make sure that we continue to right-size our public safety system while also recognizing that we have to have a public safety system which is equitable and transparent. As a person of color who also has two sons who look a lot like me, I recognize it's awfully important that our police treat every Portlander with respect and fairness, and as long as I'm your mayor, that will be the priority that I bring to this work. And the last space where we have to have courage, I believe, and we have to make some change, has to deal with economic vitality. You know, for the last 20 or 30 years, Portland has grown economically. We've become more culturally diverse and more vibrant. But frankly, that is starting to change. As I mentioned earlier, last year, Portland's population actually shrank for only the second time in actually 141 years. That is remarkable. It's a sign that something is going wrong with our city. I will tell you also, as just someone who has to pay for these roads and these sidewalks and the water pipes that bring clean water to you and the pipes that take dirty water out of your house, if our population shrinks, it becomes awfully difficult to provide basic services to folks without increasing taxes. And I also recognize one of the reasons why people are leaving Portland is because taxes are too high. So one of the things I think that we really need to do is to come together as a community and embrace the notion that we need to be a great place to start a business, grow a business, start a family, grow a family. I think we can do that by being mindful of the economic burdens that government imposes on Portlanders. I think we also need to recognize we have to create the conditions that allow families and businesses to grow. You know, if you're afraid to send your kids down to your local playground, you know, at some point you begin to wonder whether or not this is where you want to make your home. And if you own a business, and indeed, I will tell you, I had this conversation probably not an hour ago. I was talking to a local business person who owns a corner store in Portland. There's been a RV parked in front of his store for the past day or two. The guy living in the RV is very aggressive, obviously, either through mental illness or drugs. There is something off there. He's afraid. Tom, that business owner, I've seen the videotape of him being beaten in his own store at Southeast 20th and Stark on more than one occasion. And so one of the things that I think we have to do is to, you know, provide Portlanders and business people like Tom with the security, the livability, and the support they need in order to actually grow that great little neighborhood business. And I believe that we also need to do the same to support families like yours, to make sure that you feel comfortable raising your kids in the city, raising your grandkids in your city, growing old and retiring in this city. And I believe that if we come together and have the courage to change and the courage to listen to each other and the patience to work together, we can indeed achieve our goal of making Portland the best run city in America again. So that's who I am, and that's kind of my vision for the city, and that gives you a sense of what I've been working on for the past 2.5 years. And I hate to hear myself talk this much without being in a conversation, so I'd love to take this moment to have a little bit of dialogue. Does anyone? Go ahead.
Microphone.
Sure.
We moved here 8 years ago, and immediately were struck by how exciting it was that there were neighborhood associations, and immediately became involved with our neighborhood association. It was very helpful because the Northeast Coalition of Neighborhoods was strong and funded, and was able to give money to the various neighborhood associations so we could then serve our community better. But two things happened. One is we stopped getting money, and two, the costs of things like having a movie in our park went up. And so if we are really to be strong as a neighborhood association, we can't be spending all of our time trying to dig up money. We need to be able to do what we need to do, which is build community and work together. And so one of my primary interests is, what do you feel about the neighborhood associations and supporting them?
I want to join in that if I
Sure,
can.
no, absolutely, let's make this a compound question.
Well, another board member and I attended, I'm sure you heard about it, there was a coalition of neighborhood associations got together, and there were 64 of 100, 60-something of 100
Yeah.
neighborhood associations made an effort to be present. And I mean, I think the city of Portland has a tremendous resource out here, and it has become less and less listened to. And so I do think it's very important to restart. I mean, that's how you can get neighborhood input.
I couldn't agree with you more. I told, as many of you know, and as I mentioned earlier, I literally used to be the person at the city who was in charge of helping organize the neighborhood association system. I embrace that work because our neighborhood association system is an example of Portland historically being one of the best run, most innovative cities in America. I've seen the incredible work that neighborhood associations do. Indeed, one of the staffers in my office, Adam Lyons, who used to head up the Northeast Coalition of Neighbors, I brought him in because that experience of working with grassroots Portlanders is the kind of perspective and the kind of experience I want in my office. I'll also tell you, I'm optimistic about the future of our neighborhood association system. It has truly been on the rocks. I think if you take a look at the last several years on council, we probably have had some electeds who are skeptical of the system. That's never been who I am. But I am optimistic about the future. And here's why. You know, literally in about 16 months, we're going to have a new form of government. One of the things that's going to happen here is we're going to start to elect members of council by districts. So we'll divide the city up into 4 districts, which in many ways references the geographic approach to representation, which is embedded in the neighborhood association system. One of the things that I am hopeful about and will be advocating for, both in my year and a half that I still have in this job, and should I be mayor, is to integrate our neighborhood association system into our new form of government. I frankly think that you folks can play an even more important role as we move towards district-based representation, to actually educate council and shape the budgets around how we go about allocating resources. And I also think that as we have seen how our neighborhoods have evolved over the last several years, some of the skepticism around the role of neighborhood associations in our civic life has been debunked. You know, as I look back on the pandemic era, boy, I sure wish we had, as a city, been more open to and taken more advantage of the incredible resiliency and creativity that our neighborhood associations bring. I see that in livability issues. I see that in public safety issues. I see that in the need to kind of build social capital. You know, I think now more than ever we really need to bring people together in places like movies in the park, because we have been isolated from each other for a couple of years now, and I think we have some healing to do, and I think we have some bonding to do, but it's those kind of ties that get developed in meetings like this, which make for strong and vibrant communities, and that is one of my strategies for bringing Portland back. Sure.
I worked for the city of Portland for a long time.
Mike, closer.
Closer, as did Maya over there, but she has some great ideas. When I was there, I had police, fire, emergency communication, a couple of other bureaus. What frustrated me while I was there was that the bureaus tend to work in silos.
Yeah.
You can't do that. And you've got to be real, as you know, real strong to break it up.
Yeah.
We know someone that's not there now that did come in with the mayor and try and break up some of that. So, and it's really nice to have courage, but unless we can make those changes, we're in trouble. Have you talked to Tom Potter by any chance?
Yeah, I haven't talked to him, recently.
He's a good person for you to talk to.
Absolutely. I have talked to Tom Potter. I believe he was actually a supporter when I first ran on council. He's certainly someone who I think of as being a thought leader and a mentor. And I know and I've been around Portland long enough to remember his tenure. And I will also say I know exactly what you're talking about. Literally, one of the reasons why we are embracing a new form of government is to break down the silos that prevent different bureaus from working together. I do have some good news in this space. We're already making progress here. You'll notice that I'm the commissioner basically of public infrastructure, water, sewer, roads. That's not an accident. One of the reasons the mayor gave me that particular portfolio was to charge me with trying to get those three critical bureaus to work together, and it makes good common sense. For those of you who haven't done a lot of work with government, but you probably have seen public workers go through and maybe pave a road, and then maybe a couple of months later, the water bureau comes in and rips up the road again to lay in a water pipe, and then you repave it, and maybe 18 months after that, environmental services comes in and digs up the road yet again, so we can install new stormwater systems. Since I've taken over the bureau, one of the things that we're trying to do is to make sure inefficient practices like that don't go away or don't happen. So I literally have my 3 directors of my bureaus meet on a weekly basis to talk about the projects they have, how they can work together. It's been transformative in our new form of government. That approach to delivering services is going to be the new model. So literally a week from today, the mayor's office will unveil his proposal for a new organization chart for the city of Portland, and you'll divide the city up into different service areas. So different bureaus will fall into those service areas. So for example, I strongly suspect there'll be a public works sector where I expect to find water and environmental services and roads, and maybe perhaps some other current bureaus clustered together, and they'll be charged with basically having a seamless approach to government. I expect to see something very similar when we talk about public safety, economic development, so on and so forth. So we are quickly moving away from the bureau form of government, and I think that by the time we get about 17 months out, we really will be on to a different approach to government. And yes, sir, you've been very patient.
Thank you, and Shirley, this is related. I hear you on more police officers.
Yeah.
800 police officers now, maybe a little less during, different aspects of the pandemic, but for more than a year we had 1 traffic police officer, right? And that was, we now know, and there's been an article about it, strategic. That was to put pressure on city council, right? So the bureau, basically, city council's the anvil, their lack of policing was the hammer, and we were the thing hit, right? People were hurt. Makes me very angry. People I know were hurt. This was a strategy that had nothing to do with the oath of the bureau, of the department, or the success of the city, right? I know it's not, you weren't the mayor, but you're on the city council. What do you think of that? And if you were mayor, what would you do about that? Because the problem isn't money thrown at the police bureau. The problem is a culture problem, right? The problem is they feel emboldened to utilize that authority in that effort. Does that make sense?
It sure does.
Can I add on a question to that too?
Here we go.
So I kind of, semi-related police question.
Yeah.
And this is just a point of clarifying question. So you said there's 800 positions in the police bureau. I'd love to know, are those filled, or is that including the high number of vacancies?
Those are currently filled. So those are people who actually can hop into a cop car and pull someone over. right now.
Right, I've just heard in the past, there's been a high number of vacant positions.
Sure.
And so there's no point funding more positions if we can't hire the positions we currently have set aside.
Absolutely.
So that, I wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, and I appreciate both questions. One, and I'm familiar with the article you're talking about. Indeed, I think the root of that article was probably a press conference I had a couple of weeks ago about the need for more traffic enforcement. Because one of the other dynamics that has happened in the city is that traffic deaths have increased exponentially in recent years, and frankly, I do think that you're correct. Or one thing which I think is fairly transparent is there was a relationship between essentially getting out of the business of policing traffic scofflaws and frankly traffic deaths. And I saw the quote, although I was also on council during this period, and at least my observation was a little bit different. One of the things that I saw during this time was the mayor, people were leaving our police department in droves, and you can understand why. It was an awfully challenging time to be a police officer in the 2020, 2021. And folks had the option to retire or go someplace else. So we're having, as we continue to have, fundamental challenges of just making sure that our different police shifts were adequately staffed. So the mayor basically gave a directive to the police department to shut down various of our specialty units, including traffic enforcement. So frankly, I had meetings with the mayor, we talked about this. I had some concerns, I also trusted the mayor on this. So the mayor ultimately was the person who was responsible for redirecting staff away from, and it's not just traffic, it's also our detectives and whatnot, retail thefts. During the pandemic, we shut down a lot of our specialty units. Frankly, the ones we shut down were at the directive of the mayor. No one imposed that on him. How would I do things different? Well, I'll tell you, my first couple of years on council were traumatic. We were still in the George Floyd moment, we were in the pandemic moment. There was a lot of changes in the city, and a lot of the experiments and just forced choices we had some terrible outcomes. One of the terrible outcomes was this dramatic increase in traffic deaths. Probably traffic deaths in this town also increased by about threefold at this point. I think at this point in the year we might have 62, 63 traffic fatalities. It would not be, we'd typically expect to have, about half that in normal times. And I'll tell you, in the intervening couple of years, I didn't rip up my roads and make the infrastructure worse, So that isn't what changed here. I think two things happened. One is the city got out of the business of doing traffic enforcement. And then I also do think that there was a larger cultural shift which happens in our city. I will leave historians and scholars and psychologists to figure out what it was, but I think if you just drive on our streets or drive on our highways, people obviously drive differently and more aggressively than they did in the past. And I think that's one of the things that our next council or next mayor needs to do, is to remind Portlanders that we need to look out for each other. Don't drive drunk or high. I will tell you 40% of the traffic fatalities that we have in Portland at this point involve one or two parties who are under the influence of drugs or alcohol. There is a cultural shift has overtaken our town in the last couple of years, and I think one of the things that we have to do moving forward is to come together as a community and reaffirm the values that we bring to being good neighbors to each other. So, thank you for the question. Any other questions? Go ahead.
When we talk about having more policing, I keep hearing these rumors that other resources to deal with mental health issues and things like that are being cut or not being funded, not being supported. And I was at the Kenton Library the other day, and there were 2 police officers dealing with an extremely disturbed young woman, and they were being wonderful, very kind, but I don't think they're who she needed.
Yeah.
And I think that that's another, not maybe more cops so much as more people to deal with the various issues that are leading to issues of public safety.
You wanna build on that one?
I have a really interesting follow-up.
Please
I
use the mic.
apologize. Sorry.
Sure.
I apologize. So, my name is James. I own 3 businesses in North and Northeast Portland. I've had a lot of experience with whether it's break-ins in the evening or during the day, someone coming in experiencing mental health crisis. Had a unique experience in the last few months where I actually called to have Portland Street Response come, but I was told by a 911 dispatcher that they could not enter a business.
Yeah.
That sounded odd to me. Some colleagues in the St. John's neighborhood had a similar experience. They actually reached out to a Portland Street Response person who said that was not their understanding of how it worked and that they could enter businesses. Long story short, I came to learn through some investigation, actually with some reporters, that there was a huge conflict on whether or not they could or could not, and that there may have been some kind of misguided policies. It seems to me the spirit of the law is that they should be able to come in businesses and help, because I don't necessarily want to wait for police officers if someone just needs help. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on kind of what should be happening.
Sure. I think I can address both. Here, let's stack those questions. One, embedded in both questions is this observation that police are not always the answer, and that is just obviously true. And indeed, I think one of the original sins of Portland is to essentially send a police officer out to deal with every challenge that we don't really have a good answer to, which frankly is a lot like sending a Marine out to fight poverty or mental illness. That's literally what we're doing. It's also one of the reasons why we stood up Portland Street Response. I'll tell you, as I look at the press coverage over Portland Street Response, and I know there's been a petition drive, I'll tell you the honest truth. There's everyone on council, as far as I know and as I've seen, supports this program. Thinks it's the right thing to do, and this is in Commissioner Gonzalez's portfolio. If Gonzalez is a straight shooter. If he thought he didn't support the program, he'd just tell you, I don't support the program. But I'm behind closed doors with Renee. That's not what he says to me. I think we have a funding problem with that program, but frankly, we have a funding problem with the fire department. We have a funding problem with PBOT. So funding problems are not unusual. Indeed, they're just part of what happens here. Indeed, I think Portland Street Response is an important tool. Frankly, one of the reasons we stood that up is exactly this. I remember the origin of it. I was very much part of that discussion. The goal here was to have a first response service that wasn't for police, that didn't involve police, for people who are having crises out on the street. And I think they have exactly achieved our goals. When we stood up this program, we thought Portland Street Response would probably divert about 5% of police calls to that unit. Frankly, they're doing it. That's exactly what Portland Street Response is bringing to the scene. Now, one of the challenges of Portland Street Response is they can kind of come in, intervene, try to stabilize the person, largely through human connection, maybe giving them some water, or whatnot. But what is lacking in our system is the set of drug rehab or drug treatment beds or housing that is really the antidote that we're looking for. Now, one of the challenges in this space is that Portland are kind of first responders. We go out and kind of find whether it's a fire, a crime, someone going through a mental health crisis, and then we connect them to whatever services that we can. But we don't provide those mental health services. Those are provided by the county. Now it's interesting, and I encourage you to reach out to your county commissioner that serves this particular community and have a conversation about why the county is not able to, why the county is not able to actually ramp up the social services that we need in this space. I'm mystified by this. I'm frankly kind of angry by this. If you read the papers, the county is literally sitting on $60 million for homeless services that they haven't been able to get out the door this year. It's mystifying to me. I know it's an awfully challenging space, but it's also unacceptable. It's both incredibly cruel to the people who are living on the streets, and frankly, as someone who provides the services that are in my portfolio, let's take PBOT. One of the ways I fund PBOT is I have people who go out and give you parking tickets. And I know people don't like that, but we get by issuing tickets, we keep parking spaces clear so people can get to your business and whatnot. One of the things that's happened in recent years is the people that I have issuing parking tickets have now largely been diverted to trying to manage our RV crisis. So they're doing outreach to folks who are living in RVs, trying to connect them to services and places that they can park, which is important work. Frankly, it's not the work that PBOT traditionally does, and while we do that, it also means we're not keeping parking spaces in your business district clear. Also means I'm not raising revenues to support the work I do, which is why we need to have a better relationship with the county and a more functional partner on both sides of the coin. Now, you also raised this question about Portland street response not coming into your building. I'll tell you, up until the beginning of this year, I used to be the commissioner in charge of 911, which put me really at the table of trying to think about the ways in which our first responder system and our public safety system comes together, which included, amongst other things, thinking about the policies and procedures that govern Portland street response. Now, I'm 6 months, if not more, removed from actually having a day-to-day operational responsibility for that. But I'll tell you, certainly when we first stood up the program, one of the parameters that we had was Portland Street Response was intended to basically serve people who are out on the street and not basically go into people's homes. Part of that, frankly, was a matter of resources. At the time, you might remember when I first came to council, Portland Street Response was a tiny pilot project out in Lentz, and then over time we managed to expand it citywide and also expand the hours that we did. The other concern there was frankly a matter of safety. We have managed to, so far we haven't had any Portland Street Response workers seriously injured, although we track those codes and they get into some dicey situations. When you send a cop out, a cop has a bulletproof vest and a partner and some protocols. And we have a system there. Portland Street Response is this brand new thing we're standing up. I know we took the procedures and the protocols we had for them very seriously. We're learning and evolving all the time. I know there was a big debate when I was there as to whether or not we'd go inside buildings. And frankly, I don't know what the policy there is. I suspect that probably it's literally evolving a little bit. So that's probably what was happening in that space. And it sounds like there's a lack of clarity amongst staff. One of the things I can do is go, I'm still very close to the folks over at 911 who are sort of gatekeepers here, and obviously I talked to Commissioner Gonzalez, who's in charge of Portland Street Response and Fire, and I'll underscore the need to make sure that our staff, number one, I'll find out what the policy is, and number two, I'll emphasize to those folks the need to really clarify whether or not you can go inside or not.
kind of out of time, but so if everybody can keep things brief.
Sure. I think that was directed towards me.
First of all, thanks for coming out to our little corner of the city.
It's a lovely neighborhood.
Yeah, appreciate it. So we've heard some things that, from different people of different things that don't work.
Yep.
And your thing, maybe it's gonna be your campaign thing about the courage to look at things a little differently, try some things. Well, one could make the argument
Yep.
that the nearly dystopian situation we're experiencing now is the result of trying new things. You know, and it seems like some unintended consequences have risen from that. So I would suggest to you that courage also takes the form of maybe, you know, showing some restraint in in a lot of ideas that need further consideration because of those unintended consequences. So that brings me to, and I don't want to raise any eyebrows, but our current mayor.
Yep.
What would you say are some of the things that would set you apart from him and some of the policies that you implement?
Well, thanks for the question. I think one obvious difference between myself and the mayor at this point is our relationship with the county. The mayor is very stuck on getting the county to support the Safe Rest Villages that we've stood up. And indeed, frankly, if you haven't checked out a Safe Rest Village, I think the experience and progress we've made there has been remarkable. The county at this point is not actively engaged in supporting the people that we live in those spaces. I think the mayor's top priority is to make sure that the county provides services and funding for that, and we're still kind of in a stalemate on that. And indeed, I support the mayor's efforts there. At the same time, the Safe Rest Villages, while an important tool, are just the tip of the iceberg in terms of our needs to cooperate and collaborate on social services to our most vulnerable Portlanders. I am basically to the point of saying the county has to improve, frankly, by the end of this calendar year, or I am going to advocate that we fundamentally restructure and reimagine the way in which we engage with the county on serving our houseless folks. You know, we got people off the streets and in these tiny house villages. We give $40 million to the county to serve houseless folks. We don't know how those dollars get spent or if they get spent. However, I think we have enough experience as a city in this space to actually use those dollars to actually support the people who are getting off the streets, getting into tiny houses. And I think if we depend less on the county to actually step in at some point and invest those dollars into getting people back on the street, I think that would make a huge difference. I think the mayor made a huge mistake, as we mentioned earlier, in getting rid of some of our specialty units. Getting rid of traffic enforcement was a disaster. You know, frankly, we saw a dramatic reduction in the number of detectives that we have in Portland to get people, you know, out from doing kind of investigative work to basically chasing 911 calls. While I understand the trade-off there, one of the things that's happened is I think we haven't actually been able to solve crimes. And so we frankly have more shooters on the street. You know, if we caught, you know, there's not 300 people shooting each other in this town. There are a relative handful of folks who are pulling triggers. Frankly, we have, I think, a fairly good sense of who they are, but because of the ways the police department has been managed or mismanaged, we've been incredibly ineffective in this space, and this is very much hurting us. So those are some of the changes that I think we need to make. You've been very patient.
Yeah, but I think my friend
guilty
here
if I-
was first.
Maybe we can do two more and I'll let you finish your meeting.
Okay, this is maybe a little bit more philosophical.
Sure, all right, I like philosophy.
You talk about, in order to revitalize Portland, we have to pay attention to the economic.
Yeah.
And one of the economics is we wanna return workers to downtown.
Yep.
Workers don't wanna return to downtown. I mean, I think we're in one of those points in history where things change.
Yep.
And the things that are changing are the COVID basically showed us that 50% of the working population can work from home. I mean, I don't want to, because I don't want to support people in Texas, but people in Houston can do jobs here in Portland. Do you have any thoughts about how that factors in and how you would even try to address it?
Revision downtown.
Absolutely, a great question, great points, and I like the footnote there, re-envision downtown, which is I think what we need to do. I'll tell you, we learned a lot during COVID. One is, a lot of people can work online, and that frankly explains part of our economic condition. One of the other things that we learned during COVID, if you watch the neighborhoods that actually did fairly well during this period, both in Portland and throughout America, the neighborhoods that had a rich mix of both commercial and residential tended to do best. And so I think it is very clear that one of the strategies for reinventing downtown and making it a vibrant place is to increase the number of housing units that we have in this space. Frankly, I think that this is a common sense move that we have to make. One of the things that you'll see me do hopefully by the end of this year is to partner with my colleagues on council to bring forward a proposal to create a new essentially urban renewal zone downtown, which will basically fund and support building more residential housing, which is great. Frankly, the housing that we have downtown is some of the most affordable housing that we have in the city. If you take a look at the Pearl and compare it to other parts of the city, actually the Pearl has kind of navigated our economic challenges fairly well, and we think one of the reasons there is so we have so much residential space there. So I think that's one of the changes that we need to do. It's also one of the reasons why I supported creating incentives to encourage businesses for downtown in particular to re-sign their leases. So if you do that, we'll give you a little bit of a tax break. Also, one of the reasons why my colleagues on council and I think literally just last week, supported creating a zone downtown, an enterprise zone, which basically says if you invest in your business by buying, building out your facility or buying new equipment, we'll give you a tax break. In other words, if you invest in Portland, we'll invest in you. I think we've laid the groundwork right now through a set of really innovative policies over the last, literally, kind of couple of weeks where we've made, I think, Portland's one of the most attractive places, at least on paper, to invest. And I think that's one of the changes that we need to make. Do I have time for one more question? Or am I
We'll
getting
do
off
it,
on
we'll
that?
take it.
Thanks for staying later. As the head of PBOT for the next year and a half, what do you see the Bureau doing to try to calm the traffic in our neighborhoods?
Great question. Well, I think there are three things that contribute to traffic safety. One is infrastructure, and I'll tell you, we're out there every day, reinventing our roads to make them safer. We're in some places we're doing road diets to bring the speeds down. We're adding bike lanes. We're placing medians that kind of discourage people from making dangerous turns and whatnot. Hasn't been easy. Speaking of courage, Google Mingus maps and division, and you'll notice a lot of folks are awfully upset with me around that, but I believe that part of our obligation is to build the infrastructure of the 21st century. Deeply committed to doing that. Another piece is, frankly, enforcement. I think one of the things that has really changed in Portland in the last couple of years is we got rid of our traffic division, and so if you are inclined to speed, frankly, the risk of you, it is literally the case, if you speed, and as long as you don't crash and injure somebody or do a lot of property damage, you know, you are not going to be in any significant legal trouble. That's just true. To a, frankly, a horrifying extent. And the good news is, we've been having these discussions in City Hall for a long time, and we are starting to add back traffic enforcement. That's something I'm going to stick with. And the third leg of building a safer road system has to deal with culture. You know, we talked about that a little bit earlier. You know, people just drive differently today than they did even 2 or 3 years ago. I think we learned that during COVID. You know, frankly, one of the things that happened during COVID is there was less traffic, and so there's more room for people to speed. And we just saw that, and we saw it in real time and understood it. Now people are still speeding, even though we have much more traffic on the road. So that's a problem, and that's one of the reasons why you will see me, you know, out having press conferences, reminding Portlanders that, you know, please drive safe, please drive sober. You know, and if you don't do those 2 things, we also have traffic enforcement, so there is both a carrot of being a good citizen and the stick of, you know, you'll be held accountable for your actions. We were talking about courage there. If you go to Bike Portland or look in the newspaper about how that was covered, a lot of folks who frankly I think agreed with me from the bike community were very upset and yelled at me a lot, but I think that's the conversation that we need to have. So how do we make our roads safer? Infrastructure, enforcement, and culture change. And with that, I think I have eaten up far more of your meeting than I was supposed to. So maybe I will pause here and just thank you all for having me here today. I also want to thank you for engaging in the life of our city. You know, this is truly what democracy looks like. And I'll tell you, regardless of who our mayor is, whether it's me or somebody else, I think if we continue to work together, listen to each other, and care for our city, we can achieve that North Star of making Portland the best run city in America again. Thank you very much. Sure.
And thank you so much for taking the time to be here.
Oh, of course, and please invite me back. I'm happy to come anytime. Yes. Absolutely, one of my favorites. I used to Thank you, everybody.
So I was hoping to hear from NECN about what the actual districting that ended up being chosen. And they didn't let me know, but I went online and found it, and it looks like it is the Alder. It's the one that we all wanted. It's the one that